Voice America. Live. This is Point of View. And now, Liberty McArtor.
Welcome to the Friday edition, and thank you for joining us on Point of View. Lots of great topics to talk about today, everything from what's happening at First Liberty Institute, some big stories there. We're going to talk about religious liberty and some lawsuits in California having to do with the pro-life issue. Also, what's going on in politics around the nation, everywhere from Michigan to Texas. And we'll end talking about robots and elder care and friends and family, which I think is always a great place to wrap up a conversation. But anyways, let me introduce my co-panelists today. Erin Smith, Associate Counsel with First Liberty Institute, and Dr. Merrill Matthews is back in the studio with us today. So thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Great to be here.
All right, so let's talk about what's going on. A Michigan hospital pays $410,000 to settle a lawsuit by a physician assistant who was fired over transgender policy. So basically, if I understand this correctly, Erin, Valerie Kloosterman, First Liberty's client, was wanting to not participate in some things where she worked in the medical field because of her Christian faith. And then let's just say that she was not treated very well or very constitutionally in response to that. So what's her situation about?
That's right. Yeah. So we represent Valerie, and she is a physician's assistant at Michigan, the University of Michigan Health West, for those that know that hospital or that teaching school. So she was fired for her religious objection to the mandatory gender identity training that was happening at the hospital. And so she was fired for objecting to that and wanting to not participate because it violated her Christian beliefs. So this case has been going on since 2022 is when we brought the lawsuit on her behalf. And so this has been going on for a very long time. This has been a very long and hard battle. And so I really have to give a lot of credit to Valerie and her family for continuing to stand for what they believe in. Yeah. Because this has been going on. We tell people, right, these lawsuits can take a long time. Yeah. And it took a very long time to get to the $410,000 settlement, which is great. But another really great thing that came out of this settlement is that the hospital is changing its policies, right? So that other people don't have to suffer the way that Valerie has, right? They can raise a religious objection to things like mandatory gender identity training. Mm-hmm. And so they've agreed, to change their policy to train employees on religious accommodations and those sorts of things. And so really it's a great step. It's just a bummer that, and that's an understatement, a bummer that this is how this had to happen. And so, but a great, fantastic outcome. The lawyers on our team and the other lawyers that we work with came to a great resolution. So we're very, very grateful that we were able to resolve this for Valerie and for others like her in the future.
Yeah. Are you seeing any similar issues in other hospitals?
I think it happens everywhere, right? We see it all the time that these hospitals they're going rogue. They have their own ideas. They don't know what the law says, or they don't care what the law says. And so it's great. We appreciate people being willing to stand up and reach out to First Liberty if they receive pushback for that.
I was looking at the Religious Liberty State Index that First Liberty has, where you can actually, and I believe it was Arkansas that was the number one winner for religious liberty recently. Right. Okay. Yeah. So you can go to this index and look up the policies in your state. And so we were talking about that on the weekend edition a couple of weeks ago. And I went home and I was looking at it and I was talking to someone like you can, look up all these different areas where religious freedom is affected, including in the medical field. And they were like, really? And I think a lot of people maybe who aren't working in the medical field maybe aren't thinking you can protect religious liberty there too. But it really does just make me realize cases like this, all the different aspects where our religious faith should be able to influence what we're doing. And yet people like Valerie, they hit those roadblocks or they get pushback on their religious freedom. And so I would just refer people, I can't remember the exact website. I can look it up unless you know it off the top of your head, Erin. But to go look at that index and see, do you have any sort of medical religious freedom protections in your state? Because it seems like this is a good reminder of why that matters.
Yeah, you could go check out religious liberty in the states. There's a whole, that website will come up and you can go go click on your state or a state where, a friend or family member lives, people should be talking to their elected officials and saying, why are we, either ranked so lowly, or commend them. Like, if you're in Arkansas, you need to be commending the people that you've elected, because they have done a fantastic job. We had a great press conference with Governor Huckabee Sanders, and she recognized, right, our rights come from God, not from the government, but the government's role is to protect those rights, our God-given rights. And so it was a fantastic event. Arkansas edged out Florida from last year, and so trying to increase some competition in the states to say this is an important thing. The United States Constitution provides the floor for our rights.
Erin, give us a few examples of what might be a religious liberty issue in healthcare that I might face.
Yeah, so you could face something like Valerie, where it's mandatory training of some kind that you want a religious opt-out or you have a religious objection to it. It could be providing particular types of care. It could be, I don't want to provide abortion care, or I don't want to. We saw in the Childs versus Salazar case out of Colorado, it could be, gender-affirming care in the counseling space. And so a lot of people don't think about the counseling space when they're thinking about healthcare either.
There was an issue for a while about pharmacists being able having to deliver certain prescriptions that people that didn't want to.
Yeah, absolutely, that's right too. Dispensing abortion, chemical abortion drugs or things like that, or so anything that touches really abortion or gender affirming care or transgender issues. There are a lot of faithful people that have objections to that, and so putting in protections for, say you think that providing a referral is a step too far, right? Putting protections in place that they need to create a system so that these people are protected and can exercise their religious liberty rights, even if it's something like, I don't want to participate in, abortion care at all. Well, what are the protections? Also, what are the protections if it's deemed an emergency? Right? Like, are they not protected when it's an emergency all of a sudden? So these are things that lawmakers are starting to realize, we need to go a step further. It's not just, I can't sit in my doctor's office. It's ER doctors that are sitting there going, I have an objection, but this is also an emergency. Where's the line? How do we deal with that? And so, states like Arkansas or Florida have these protections in place, and they're good resources because this is what the Religious Liberty in the States Index provides. Lawmakers in different states can go look and see, what are they doing in these states that are really protective? Can we just, crib from that and put those protections in place in states like Texas, for example? What's Texas missing, and what do we need to add to be better protective?
Yeah, so definitely check that out. Look up religious liberty in the states. See how well your state protects religious liberty in the medical field, but in other areas as well. And, First Liberty has had a lot of victories recently, which is wonderful. But it's important to enshrine these protections when you have the opportunity. And when we come back from the break, I want to talk about the future of religious freedom a little bit, because we really need to make sure these rights are protected. The government officials may not always be friendly to it. So we'll talk about that when we get back from this short break.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Common sense is surfacing in many of the policies and programs associated with transgenderism. One illustration can be found in a recent article about the long march out of the gender clinics. The author provides a transcript of a video in England that has gone viral. The interview is with Labour Member of Parliament and Health Secretary James Murray. He was asked about his evaluation of puberty blockers, as well as the Cass Review study that raised significant questions about the way in which hormones and surgeries were recommended by the government. The interviewer challenged the fact that he'd been pro-trans in the past and seemed to be backing off of his previous aggressive stance. Although he said he had changed his mind, many argued that he could see the cultural winds blowing the other way and lost his dogmatism. At the same time, there was another article about the fact that one of the most gender-affirming care arguments used by proponents was based on a flawed study. If a child wanted to change sexes, the parents were informed that not to do so would increase the likelihood their child could commit suicide. In other words, do you want a trans child or a dead child? The initial study that was published in the journal Nature Human Behavior was authored by researchers from the Trevor Project, a trans advocacy group. This study has been cited hundreds of times in the news and court cases. Although the study looked at 48 states, much of the purported increase in attempted suicides came from one state. I encourage you to follow the link in the analysis of their research so that you can see the legitimate concerns with the study. The transgender debate has needed some common sense. It appears that some has finally come to this discussion. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
All right, let's talk about religious liberty for a few more minutes. This is an article from the Daily Signal. By the way, you can read along with all of our topics at pointofview.net. But as you know, President Donald Trump appointed a Religious Liberty Commission to look at religious liberty violations in the United States and then protections. And so they just wrapped up their first year in July. And Erin, they have been extended. The commission has been extended for another year. Is that correct?
That's right. That's right.
Great. So at this point, the commission heard lots of testimony over several hearings. They made recommendations. Now they get another year to oversee the implementation of those, which seems like it's probably important because, as this Daily Signal article reports, you have seen some pushback. Thankfully, it didn't go very far, but from activist groups on the far left asking a court to block the Religious Liberty Commission's proceedings. And their argument is that the conservative Jews and Christians who try to live out their faith are engaging in bigotry, that there was not enough religious diversity on the commission, and basically that the commission members were trying to protect Judeo-Christian values and promoting those. It's kind of funny since our nation is founded on those values. But anyways, this was blocked. It did not go very far. But Erin, it does make me think about what might happen when you don't have a presidential administration that is as friendly to religious liberty as the Trump administrations have been. And we know those are coming to a close. And so, who knows in the future whether or not you're going to have this kind of religious liberty activity happening at the executive level. And so it seems, again, like this is the time to really implement these protections and make sure that they stay, and for who knows what might happen in the future. And
that's why we're grateful that the president, saw fit to extend the commission for another year to say, hey, the commission needs to oversee the implementation of and adoption of their recommendations that they made after many hearings, lots of testimony from different people that have encountered discrimination, persecution because of their religious beliefs. And something that Kelly Shackelford has said from the very beginning, his goal on the commission was to make recommendations that would be more permanent, right? That they can't just get tossed out the window at the whim of the next president or whoever's making these changes. And so really, I think that they made some really great recommendations that if they're implemented will protect religious liberty for farther into the future than just the next election.
And how do they implement them? I mean, do you go to Congress for a law, or do you just press on the Supreme Court to make? How do you implement it? I'm wondering.
Yeah, so a lot of the recommendations are directed at the president and the agencies. So it's the president should recommend that they adopt new rules or go through rulemaking process, or direct the which they have the IRS to not prosecute under the Johnson Amendment, but also, hey, your administration should be going to Congress to ask them to do these things, because we know that when Congress does something, it has a lot more staying power than an executive order that can be erased on day one. So that's kind of the process. It's lots of layers and talking to people, getting buy-in, those sorts of things.
Is there a state level component? Because in the COVID shutdown, a lot of states said the churches can't be open, but the liquor stores can be. So is there a state level component?
So the Religious Liberty Commission was created by an executive order by President Trump to make recommendations to the federal government. I think there are a lot of really great suggestions that if states want to take a look at what the Religious Liberty Commission found and take, positive steps, this is a great blueprint for things that states could go do too. So,
something I talked about on Monday, Dr. Matthews, was another Daily Signal article actually looking at how close races for state representatives are, and how there were specific numbers. It's still on the website if people want to go and look at it, but coming down to 10 votes or even 1 vote at the state level. And so a lot of times we focus on the president and our senators and, congressmen, which are very important. But when we're talking about a lot of these religious liberty protections, and like you pointed out during COVID, so much of it comes down to the states. And I think maybe people aren't aware of how much your vote truly does matter in those kinds of races.
And it's important to have something that looks at states and which ones are doing a good job versus bad job, because state politicians, like all politicians, look around to find something. I don't mean to make this sound pejorative, but they look around for something that looks like it's a winning issue that they can then get behind and then say to their constituents, I'm the one who led the charge on this issue. And so states look among themselves to try to see and a lot of these state legislators from various states know each other because they go to various conferences. I see my friend Senator such and such over here in this state has done a good job, so I'm going to on this issue, so I'm going to try to promote it in my state. We saw that back in the late 1990s when Wisconsin was doing a great job on welfare reform, and Tommy Thompson, the governor, was getting all kinds of public attention at this, and other states said, including Texas, said, let's go do something like that so that we can get that attention also.
Positive peer pressure, which, the competition aspect of the Religious Liberty Index, I think, is great. And like you made a point a few minutes ago about let them know when they're doing a good job, too, to say, hey, the voters like this. And then, we can say in another state, look at how much positive attention they're getting. And I do think it's interesting, you mentioned back to Valerie Kloosterman, how her whole situation with, was she initially fired because of this?
She was fired for refusing the training. Yeah.
Okay, for refusing the gender identity training, and that was in 2022.
She was fired in 21. We sued in 22.
Wow. Okay, so this has been going on for a long time. It just makes me think, though, that even back then, you did have some conservative states that were starting to push back on the gender transition, especially for minors, and I'm starting to see that take off more. There was an article in the Free Press this week that was about somebody who had worked at one of the clinics coming out and being a whistleblower about how much harm it had done to minors. I think Texas is actually about to start at Children's Health Hospital a detransitioning clinic where any minor or anyone who received a gender transition treatment as a minor is actually able to go and get detransitioning treatment for free. And so their tide is turning. And again, I think that's where people might jump on the bandwagon once it becomes popular, but somebody has to get that started at some point.
And I had on here Jordan Campbell, who was at a large law firm, left that law firm here in Dallas and started a small law firm to work strictly on these cases, and they had a number of them that they were beginning. And this was sort of a couple of years ago, and they were starting the process. And I think Kelly and I have both agreed that if you get this in front of juries are going listening to minors say they didn't tell me the truth, and now my health and so forth has been affected for the rest of my life. Juries are going to award these plaintiffs big awards, and that's going to do more to change the practice, I think, than most anything else, just because if the malpractice companies don't step up and provide insurance, and hospitals, healthcare clinics see them being sued for a significant amount of money, they'll back away from the practice.
Yeah. And speaking of just the lies, this was in the Fox News article that you can read at pointofview.net about Valerie. But when she was fired, so this is what you documented at First Liberty Institute, that her employers called her evil and a liar, told her she could not bring her religious beliefs into the workplace, and accused her of contributing to suicides among individuals with gender dysphoria. And now we know that one of the big studies that people kept pointing to, saying if you don't allow your child to transition, they will commit suicide, was faulty. And I think a lot of people had common sense. A lot of Christians did. But at the time, that very much was the rhetoric that if you oppose this at all, you are contributing.
Absolutely was.
And so I applaud her and everybody else, whether they were a state politician or just an individual standing up, to push back against that when it was not popular to do so.
It's hard for parents who are talking to a healthcare professional. They may not have any real knowledge about this at all. And the healthcare professional says, if you don't do this for your child has a significantly increased chance of committing suicide. What do you do as a parent?
Yeah, that's a very, very scary place to be. So the truth is coming out, but it didn't just happen by accident. You had brave individuals like Valerie standing up and willing to go through a very long and difficult process in order to finally be recognized for what happened to her. You had politicians who did stand up, a lot of in conservative states, and go against the grain when it wasn't popular. And now we're seeing that trend start. So anyways, go to Religious Liberty Index, look that up online, see what's happening in your state, because whether it's popular in your state right now or not, you need to get those religious liberty protections in place, because we don't know what the government's going to do in the future. Enshrine them while you can. When we get back, let's talk about a case in California where pro-life organizations are being punished for helping women yet again. We'll be right back.
I'm sure that you've noticed that social media is now filled with information generated by AI. Dramatic descriptions of politicians and music stars supposedly making statements about a current issue, leaning into the microphone, looking into the lens, opponents silenced. It's powerful, it's riveting, and it's all lies. Even several national television networks were recently found using enhanced pictures, meaning manipulated, falsified, literally not giving a true picture. So many liars, so much deception. Where can we turn for truth? Right here. From Kerby and the team at Point of View, we need your support. Please join the Point of View Truth Team today with a monthly gift of $30 or more. Together, we can shine the light of truth and dispel the darkness and deception of this day. Give now at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. pointofview.net and 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Liberty McArtor.
All right, Dr. Matthews, you sent this to me earlier in the week, and we talked about it a little bit on Monday, but I'm really looking forward to getting your perspective and Erin's as well, because there's so much here. This is coming out of California, which is not really surprising.
No surprise there.
Given what we're talking about. But This is the title here. The Wall Street Journal has an article. You can read it, pointofview.net. California's case against second chances. So what happened is Elizabeth Barrett, she is a young college dropout in Southern California. She took a chemical abortion pill, but then she changed her mind right away, went online to try to find out if there was any way to reverse what she had done. And there is. We've written about this. If you want to look up abortionpillreversal.com, it's a good website to memorize just in case you ever need to recommend it to somebody in an emergency. And there is a way to potentially reverse a chemical abortion. Now, it's not 100% of the time, but it is an option that has saved many unborn lives, and it actually worked for Miss Barrett. She is now the mother of a healthy girl. And now the state of California says, we don't want that to happen again. Yeah. They're actually trying to fine Heartbeat International and another small pro-life organization for even posting online that there is a potential reversal for the abortion pill. And another lawsuit, a similar one, has been filed in New York, by the way. So they want doctors to supposedly be able to prescribe the reversal, but just nobody can actually tell women that that's a possibility.
And they're prosecuting them.
Yeah.
Not many things leave me speechless these days, but this was one that did. Because why? If somebody changes their mind, if you're getting ready to go into surgery, hernia surgery or whatever, at the last minute you say, I'm changing my mind, everybody respects that. So why, if you take the pill and you say, I don't think I want to do this, and she apparently had questions about it for some time, but she was young, had financial issues, a lot of things, and some friends may have encouraged her to go this direction, but she'd had doubts about it. She takes the pill, she changes her mind, and now the state of California is stepping in to prosecute the companies. I don't understand this.
Well, not only that, but she's sitting in the clinic and they're telling her she's she's thinking, I don't know if this is what I want to do. And they're like, well, if you don't do it now, you might not be able to get an appointment later.
Yeah.
Right. So they're
true.
almost like coercing her at that point to make that choice. And then they're going to say, but you don't get to know all of your options, only this one.
And oh my gosh. Yeah. It's so bad. It's so bad. They're not prosecuting the abortion clinic for, like you said, that would be potential coercion, I think. Definitely she was pressured and not giving her all of her options. It is a legitimate option. And it's not some, they will try, the abortion lobby will try to say that the abortion pill reversal is like, it's not proven, it's dangerous, it's some, crazy out there, in a, witch doctor contraption or something like that is kind of the vibe you get when they try to message against this. It's just progesterone, which is the hormone that you need for the baby to continue developing. And so the first abortion pill blocks progesterone so that the baby dies. But then if you take the reversal, it's just extra progesterone to try to save the baby before it's too late.
And it works sometimes.
It does. I can't remember exactly, but if you look at abortionpillreversal.com, they've got studies there that show, and the low end is like, I think it's 60 or 64% up to, a range of maybe 80% that they're kind of saying, you have a good chance. If you want to try to reverse it, you have a good chance. But there are so many angles to this. Just one, it doesn't make any sense at all. And then if nonprofits weren't allowed to talk about something that the government doesn't approve of, I mean, Erin, this has all kinds of implications, including for nonprofits on the left or that might be pro-abortion.
Right. So the argument, the California argument goes a little something like this. Nonprofits that are doing this are engaging in commercial speech to get money from their donors. And I mentioned this off air. It's kind of like telling a church they're engaging in commercial speech to get their members to tithe. Right. So it's insane, and it works the opposite way. Right. Okay. So Planned Parenthood is engaging in commercial speech every time they tell someone that they have a choice to murder their unborn child, and they're getting their sponsor, Olivia Rodrigo, to do it for them, right? We're now involving like all sorts of threads that you can pull on. This is going to affect a lot of people. The bottom line is this is speech that the government doesn't like. And so they're using a creative tool to go after these nonprofits I mean, it can affect if this is the rule, right, this would affect ultimately First Liberty's right to come and say, you have the right to freely exercise your religion, because somehow by us saying that, we are convincing people to give us money. And that's just not the case. That's crazy. And I don't see this becoming the rule. I think free speech is pretty strong at this point. The court's been pretty clear about the bounds of the exercise of free speech, and they're not going to want to delve into the nonprofit realm of what happens to every 501c3 that exists.
So where does this go? Does it end up going to the Supreme Court? Could Congress pass a law saying states can't prohibit this? What's the best way to go on this?
I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of options on the table. I don't know what the best path is or what the path will end up being. But, right, we know that the states can't infringe upon your constitutional rights because of a fun little thing called the Supremacy Clause, right? The First Amendment is the floor. The free speech and the First Amendment is the floor of what the states have to protect. And so just because California is going to come say, this is the rule in California, well, if the United States Constitution says that can't be the rule, then California can't have this rule. So it may end up before somewhere like the Supreme Court. It may get stopped dead in its tracks in California when they realize this is a really stupid thing to be arguing.
I mean, at that point, why even have any nonprofits at all if they can't talk about why, First Liberty can't talk about defending religious liberty and that being an option, or if a pro-life nonprofit can't talk about pro-life options, or even a pro-abortion nonprofit talk about different ways to get an abortion, because you might be, what was the argument, convincing people to donate money to you? It's kind of, if you go downstream, the logic is, well, I guess people aren't allowed to have interests that they want to support then. I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all. But I think really the core issue here is that this is not about being pro-choice, because if it was, then why wouldn't you want women to know all of their options? And you have people at the state level like California and New York, like we mentioned, and then, the Planned Parenthood and other organizations really trying to silence any promotion of abortion pill reversal. And so it's never been about choice.
And, Bill Clinton years ago said he wanted abortion to be safe, legal, and rare. And it was a very good way to put it from his standpoint, because it sounds like I'm not really for it. We don't want a lot of this going on, but we do want it as a sort of a safety net, is essentially what he's saying in that. If it's a safety net, if it's something for people to be able to fall back on if they're out of options, we don't agree with it anyway, but if that's something to do that, then then if somebody says, I don't want to take that step, that's fine. It's a safety net. So I'm mystified why they take this position.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, because we have gone so far past safe, legal, and rare in the discourse today.
Yes.
Because think about this. We know that a lot of women are pressured by their partners, their boyfriends, abusers at times, even parents. There's been all these investigative reports showing that a lot of times traffickers will take young women and girls to get abortions. That doesn't seem to be very much of a concern to anybody in the abortion lobby. You have these situations where the women are saying, I wasn't sure what to do. My boyfriend drove me here. They said if I didn't do it now, I couldn't get another appointment. And all of this is saying, and this is supposed to be empowering to women. None of it about the situation is empowering. And I think even if you talk to a lot of women who have been in that situation, it's not something that they want to celebrate or talk about, or that was a good experience or a good time. It's not, but that's the way that it's being portrayed, and that we all have to get on board, or otherwise we're the ones that are anti-women in that scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that's the most baffling to me, right, is that the second that you would tell some organization like Planned Parenthood you need to tell people about all of their options, they would go clinging to the free speech clause too. Mm-hmm. They'd say this is compelled speech. Like, you can't tell us what to say and what not to say. So it's a double standard, really. And that's what we keep seeing. Like, these rights are double standards, and one side's allowed to have them and the other side's not.
It seems like a very obvious double standard just because of the way that it would negatively impact other nonprofits as well, which just the only thing that I can think of then is why pursue this if it seems that you're so clearly going to lose, is because hate the pro-life movement that much.
I haven't seen where Gavin Newsom falls on this, but a man who wants to run for president, it'll be interesting to see his position.
That would be very interesting. Well, we'll be right back. We'll keep talking about this and more issues after the short break.
Since retiring from pulpit ministry 10 years ago, Anglican priest David Roseberry has found practical ways to encourage leaders in his denomination and help them grow their churches and expand their ministries. And he's still a wonderful preacher. He's also doing something he didn't have time for as a parish priest. The pastor's heart that drove his preaching now inspires his writing. All sorts of helpful books and articles. Lately, he's been writing to and for believers who are in the final stretch of the race, in the space he himself occupies. The series is now a book, Living in the Flyaway Zone. David Roseberry is 71, not old, but he describes a shift to where we are finally close enough to the edge of life to see that there is an edge. He quotes Moses, Psalm 90:10, "The years of our life are 70, or even by reason of strength, 80. Yet their span is but toil and trouble. They are soon gone, and we fly away." Father David points out that these are the years when you realize you are no longer merely accumulating, building, striving, climbing, and planning for someday. You are living the years you actually have left. It's not a time to coast or drift. There's much to do and learn, but there are ways to simplify life that bring clarity and focus. For me, it's purging stuff I'll never need. Moses lived to 120. He was emotionally, intellectually, and relationally engaged with his people and with God to the end of his natural life. We won't outlive Moses, but David Roseberry reminds us, these years still matter enormously. There's much still to give, including availability, wisdom, blessing, even money. He says, I do not want generosity postponed until after my funeral. There are practical nuggets like find younger doctors and exercise in your 70s is stewardship. Also, do hard things. At 120, Moses climbed Mount Nebo. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
All right, Dr. Matthews, a minute ago you said you wondered what Gavin Newsom thinks about this crazy case in California that's trying to silence pro-life organizations and prevent them from telling women about other options. But as we've noted, he has kind of tried to moderate his positions. I wonder why he might be trying to do that in 2026 when 2028 is just right around the corner. But really, we've seen this trend happen all over, and sometimes in very extreme ways. So Jim Garrity at National Review says the concept of America is on the ballot this November. We're seeing DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, kind of, well, at least try and in some cases succeed at taking over the Democrat Party. It's definitely the party's being pushed very, very far to the left. And the things that they are saying, a few people have tried to say, oh, no, I didn't actually mean it when I said I want to abolish the police. Some people have doubled down and said I actually do mean it. But really, that is what we're seeing is the constitutional republic on the chopping block based on the positions of the DSA and a lot of the candidates that are now winning primaries. And potentially, like in the case of Michigan, even representing a state in the Senate. So there's a lot of concerning things on the ballot coming up.
My piece last week in The Hill asked the question, could a Democratic Socialist truthfully take the oath of office? Because in their new platform, they want to eliminate the Senate, they want to take the president, and they want to take the Supreme Court, and they are going to be appointed by Congress and be under Congress. And that essentially negates the Article 1, 2, and 3 of the U.S. Constitution. Yeah. So that's not an amendment to the Constitution. That's a fundamental change of the Constitution. And so if you take the oath of office, you have to swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Can you actually do that if you're going to work to try to get the whole Constitution undermined, the basic element of it? I don't think they can. They will. They'll do it with their fingers crossed behind their back.
Yeah.
But people don't understand how radical the Democratic Socialists of America are. They just had their most recent annual summit in Chicago this past weekend. I wrote about this a year ago, and I was able to do that last year because they put their whole agenda online so you could see all the various conferences they were having and so forth, Marxism 101 and things of that nature, how to deal with abortion and so forth. This time they have some times on there, but they do not have the topics on there. And they told their people, I think about 600 people show up for the meeting. They said, don't speak to the press.
Wow. Because
the press is coming in, and and a lot of the major press were there taking pictures, trying to talk to people, find out what they believed, why they believed it, and so forth. So the Democratic Socialists of America are becoming, let's say, more media savvy at the same time as more media hesitant, because what they believe and what Americans think they believe are two different things. Recent poll, a third of Democrats say they now generally identify with the Democratic Socialists of America. That's a third of the Democrats, and roughly 60% of Democrats say they're compatible, they're happy with socialism. So it's a major change going on in the Democratic Party, and what's happening as they're able to win these various primaries. They're able to say, we've got the momentum behind us. We're beating traditional candidates. If you want to win in 2026 and later in 2028, you need to get behind us. And it's a narrative they're able to continue as long as their candidates continue to win. And right now, the next one's going to be in Wisconsin next week for the governors. And you've got a lady named Hong who is running as a Democratic Socialist. She put out a calendar where she nixed the 4th of July, Thanksgiving, a number of holidays in there, took them out of her calendar because she doesn't think that's where we ought to be supporting. So it's interesting to see what's happening. She denies a lot of those things now. But we'll see where this is going. But it is a major change going on in the Democratic Party, and we just don't know at this point whether traditionalists will be able to come back and regain control, or if the Democratic Socialists will essentially, which isn't a party, they're just a sort of an advocacy group, if they're going to be able to essentially take over the Democratic Party and put their candidates in and then determine the agenda of the Democratic Party.
I wonder if you said a third of Democrats said that they are okay with the DSA at this point. So Democrat Abdul El Sayed is the Senate candidate running in Michigan against Republican Mike Rogers. And he is for abolishing private health insurance, abolishing the filibuster, abolishing the Electoral College, abolishing ICE, abolishing Israel, and has also called for abolishing the police. He said Hassan Piker is a far leftist podcaster who is supporting him. And
as is Bernie Sanders, the senator from Vermont.
Man, I was going to say, do a third of the Democrats actually agree with all of that? Like, do you think they're paying attention enough to?
Yeah, I don't know that they're paying attention now, but with the Democratic Socialists of America and Bernie Sanders, I listened to NPR a few weeks ago when they were following a candidate in Utah, very conservative state. And this is a young guy who's running for a seat there that they've just created that's going to be likely a Democratic seat. And they're recording him as he's knocking on a door. And the person comes to the door and says, "Hi, my name is such and such. I'm running for Congress. I am supported by Bernie Sanders of Vermont." And so he used that as his opening phrase. Yeah. And Bernie has on his website, he has a list of people. I looked at it the other day. I think it's 69, 70 people, candidates around the country that he is endorsing. And so and he's very much in that camp. And of course, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. And if you look at what's happening now, she is being encouraged to run for president in 2028. And maybe she will.
Yeah. Oh.
It's definitely been creeping in for a while now.
Oh yes.
I laugh because it doesn't work. Like, we know that socialism does not work. We can take one look at history and say it doesn't work. We can look across the globe.
That's
and
assuming
see
people have taken a look at history.
It doesn't work. Well, right. I mean, I think that there's certainly some need for people to dust off their history books and take a look at, or even just pick up the world news and go look at what's happening in countries that have fully adopted and embraced socialism. But the encouraging thing to me, and maybe I'll bring a little bit of more lightness to it, right? Like,
please.
Yes, they are attacking the fundamental principles of what it means to be an American, of the American constitutional order, of the republic system that we have set up. Thankfully, it is very hard to change the Constitution, right? We have 27 amendments? Is that 20?
Yes,
27 amendments. You need 2/3 of Congress, 2/3 of both the Senate and the House, or 2/3 of the state, which that's never been done. The state has never called for an Article 5 convention of the states. That's never happened. Yeah. It then has to be ratified by 2/3 of either the state legislature, which is how most of the amendments have been adopted, or 2/3 of state conventions, which has only ever happened once. So it's a really hard and arduous process to amend the Constitution. And so that's encouraging to me, that even if, the sky falls and we've got socialists in our government, they're going to have a huge uphill battle. And I hope and pray that the American people can have enough common sense to see what's starting to happen. Because one of the first things we saw during COVID, they're going to come after your right to practice your faith.
Yes.
That's what they need. Because if we still believe our rights come from God, then we need to be able to recognize that, and the government needs to understand it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. We are about to go to a break, but we'll come back because there's more here in this National Review article. And I think it's important that we do think about this and say, okay, it seems like we can't get the Constitution changed that easily. But that means that we got to continue raising people who care about the Constitution now, because what's going to happen in the future, because they're trying to win the culture as well. We'll be right back on Point of View.
At Point of View, we believe there is power in prayer, and that is why we have relaunched our Pray for America campaign, a series of weekly emails to unite Americans in prayer for our nation. Imagine if hundreds of thousands of Americans started praying intentionally together on a weekly basis. You can help make that a reality by subscribing to our Pray for America emails. Just go to pointofview.net and click on the Pray for America banner that's right there on the homepage. Each week you'll receive a brief news update, a specific prayer guide, and a free resource to equip you in further action. We encourage you to not only pray with us each week, but to share these prayers and the resources with others in your life. Join the movement today. Visit pointofview.net and click on the banner Pray for America right there at the top. That's pointofview.net. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in our land. Point of View will continue after this. Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Liberty McArtor.
All right, it's the second hour of our weekend edition, and if you want to look at anything we're talking about today, you can read the links to the articles that we're discussing at pointofview.net. We've been talking about this National Review article. The concept of America is on the ballot, and so we were just talking about the Democratic Socialist of America and really what they are targeting. is the Constitution of the United States. They don't want there to be a Senate. They don't want lifetime appointments for the Supreme Court. I think a lot of them probably don't even want the Supreme Court as we understand it today.
Right.
They want to abolish the Electoral College, abolish ICE, so many other things. But another interesting and I think important aspect of this article is just how divided Americans are. And so even if some of the Democrats who you were saying a minute ago, Dr. Matthews, maybe they don't necessarily support everything that's on the DSA platform, they might not even pay attention to or listen to counter arguments from anybody on the right because we're just so polarized. And it goes through and it lists the approval ratings of Biden and Trump among the opposing party, and it's like almost non-existent. But in the old days, maybe it was a little more common if somebody was doing a fairly good job for people even on the opposite party to have a little bit of a higher approval rating for a president. But I don't know, maybe what's your perspective on that? Was it that we were at least both parties were operating within the context of a constitution that we agreed on?
Erin mentioned that the Democrats this has been a long time coming. People may not remember, but in the 2020 presidential election, Bernie Sanders was running for president.
Yeah.
And he was doing so well against Joe Biden that Jim Clyburn, a prominent African-American congressman from South Carolina, went to Biden and said, if you will promise to, I can't remember if it was the vice president or the Supreme Court, appoint a black lady, I will support you in South Carolina, and we'll see if we can't get South Carolina for you. Biden made the promise. And so he won South Carolina, and that sort of changed the trajectory of that election. But Bernie Sanders, who is essentially embraces he may not embrace the ending the Senate, some of the things that the Democratic Socialists of America have recently added to their platform, but he's very far along where they are. So I don't. This is something that's been happening in Democrats. Second thing I'd mention is the Democratic Socialists and the socialists in general are very good at messaging. They understand this. Bernie Sanders doesn't say, I want to create a government-run healthcare system. He says, I want a program called Medicare for All. Mm-hmm. Medicare is a very popular system. And so now if you say Medicare for All, it sounds like we're all in the Medicare system. We are not in the Medicare system. His program is not Medicare for All. It is a government-run healthcare system that healthcare is free for everybody. So they're good at marketing. Zoran Mamdani from New York, I listened to him on the Jon Stewart show when he was getting close to the election. He comes across as a very amiable, happy person, congenial. I mean, he just seemed like a happy person. Jon Stewart's eating it all up. They come across as good, happy warriors who want to make some really necessary changes. And as I was listening to Zoran, I thought, I think I'd like this guy if I sat down with him. He just seems like a very amiable person. But they are carrying an agenda that's completely different than anything we've had in America.
Yeah. It makes me think that it really is a tactic to try to use so many attacks against the opposite side that aren't true, but just labels, so that anything that maybe, a Republican might say to a person who's considering voting for a Mamdani or something like that is automatically it's racist, it's bigoted, it's, sexist, it's whatever. And I'm not even going to listen to that counter argument about what we're actually talking about. And it is, you have to establish that, though, and completely eradicate any sort of trust for the other side so that you can convince people with your ideas without really fleshing them out very much, because you know that people aren't really going to listen to any counter arguments. It seems like that's kind of where we are in our politics.
When did we start, and maybe Dr. Matthews, when did we stop having civil debates and discussions? Because I think social media has created these echo chambers that you can put yourself in, right? Even the news that you choose to listen to puts you in an echo chamber. So at what point was it, right? I've said it on the show before, I'll say it again, what happened to the West Wing Democrats, from the TV show? When did we get away from I can say that Bill Clinton has done more for religious liberty than any president with the exception of Donald Trump?
I'm going to say somewhere around 2008 to 2010. I occasionally used to get invitations from groups that would disagree with me on health policy and ask me to come. And I love going to groups that I disagree with. And you could say, you could make your points. They would come back and they would respond to things. Going to the Federalist Society, I'm a spokesperson for their Speakers Bureau, and you could go to the colleges and you could say, here's my position, and you'd get some interaction and so forth. And it was great. Loved doing it. Somewhere around, I don't know if you want to say Twitter or what, somewhere the social media or something changed this such that you just can't have these intellectual debates anymore. Kerby and I have talked about this. When we were in college, we used to go to debate. If somebody was coming in with a presentation that I disagreed with, I'd go and listen. I didn't go to hoot them down and stop them from speaking. I'd want to go see what they had to say, because that's how you interact and you sort of help improve your own arguments. Right. But somewhere, I would say around 2010, 2008, we changed.
I remember back when I was writing for The Stream, I think it was around 2017 or maybe 2016, there was a study out that I wrote a column on that majorities of both Democrats and Republicans thought that their opponents were morally evil. And I think it was slightly more Democrats that thought that than Republicans, but it was high on both sides. And I remember somebody reporting on this in The Atlantic too, who was some sort of political staffer on the Hill and remembered the days when he would sit with his Republican counterpart and they were working for opposing parties, but they would share a pizza on the steps of the Capitol at the end of the day. And just it's that same idea of being able to agree but still respect each other, or disagree but still respect each other. But if you think that your opponent is morally evil, then you're not going to have any interest in having any sort of civil relationship or interaction.
Yeah, and some of that may have happened when Gingrich became Speaker of the House, but later on it just sort of moved in. To your point, I've been at one of the restaurants in Washington where Robert Byrd and Strom Thurmond, two older people who were powerful, Republican and Democrat, and they were having dinner with two or three other people, and they were having a great time. This would have probably been 2004, 2005, something like that. You had that ability to be able to meet with other people on the other side of the aisle, and even sometimes persuade them to join you with your votes on things. It has just changed in a way that you really can't do that anymore.
Yeah, it's sad, and it's a reminder that so much of what we see with regard to politics is the headlines. It's the social media posts, but when you get to actually interacting with just a normal person who lives in the real world, then lean into the conversation, maybe even if you disagree, and see if at least at the local level we can recover some of that. There's a lot more to talk about when we get back from this short break.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Common sense is surfacing in many of the policies and programs associated with transgenderism. One illustration can be found in a recent article about the long march out of the gender clinics. The author provides a transcript of a video in England that has gone viral. The interview is with Labour Member of Parliament and Health Secretary James Murray. He was asked about his evaluation of puberty blockers, as well as the Cass Review study that raised significant questions about the way in which hormones and surgeries were recommended by the government. The interviewer challenged the fact that he'd been pro-trans in the past and seemed to be backing off of his previous aggressive stance. Although he said he had changed his mind, many argued that he could see the cultural winds blowing the other way and lost his dogmatism. At the same time, there was another article about the fact that one of the most gender-affirming care arguments used by proponents was based on a flawed study. If a child wanted to change sexes, the parents were informed that not to do so would increase the likelihood their child could commit suicide. In other words, do you want a trans child or a dead child? The initial study that was published in the journal Nature Human Behavior was authored by researchers from the Trevor Project, a trans advocacy group. This study has been cited hundreds of times in the news and court cases. Although the study looked at 48 states, much of the purported increase in attempted suicides came from one state. I encourage you to follow the link in the analysis of their research so that you can see the legitimate concerns with the study. The transgender debate has needed some common sense, It appears that some has finally come to this discussion. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Okay, so we know who's really to blame for all these problems in America. It's the elites, right? And that's maybe something that people on the left and the right can agree with. But hold on, let's define our terms here. Who are the elites? Well, there's an article that I thought was entertaining and also a little thought-provoking in the Wall Street Journal, and it's asking who do Americans really think the elites are? That's kind of become a pejorative on both the left.
Yes, it has.
Talking about, the socialist left and then the populist right. So here are just a few things, and then we can talk about this and have some fun with it. But a recent survey asked 3,000 registered voters who counted as the elites. 77% of Americans consider billionaires to be elites, and 60% described celebrities as elites. 48% thought business executives were elites. Only 43% counted elected officials as elites. A quarter of Americans said anyone making more than $200,000 a year were elites. 70% of Trump voters thought that billionaires were elites, where 86% of Kamala Harris voters thought that billionaires were elites. And it goes on and on. Basically, there's no real consensus, which means elites has kind of become a shorthand for your political enemies. So, I don't know. So, Erin, who do you think the elites are?
Well, I take your points well taken about defining terms. It's really important, right? If you're going to start in on a conversation with someone and there's going to be disagreement, that you make sure that you're talking about the same thing. So that lays some ground rules. Because what I can tell you is that there are a lot of places in the world that if you ask them that question, they would say Americans are elites, right? Yeah. Anyone that owns a refrigerator is an elite, right? Because you know that is a status symbol in a lot of places, right? So it's all about perspective. Who are the elites? Well, I can tell you who the elites are. Mm-hmm. The people pushing the DSA, that's who the elites are, right?
They are pretty educated.
That's the point of the article, is if it's somebody that you disagree with, all of a sudden, that's the elite class that's pushing it. But, Dr. Matthews, you were talking offline and are off the air, and I liked your definition.
Yeah, my definition was somebody with power who thinks he or she is better than me. And that could be an academic, but it doesn't have to do with money. I actually know one billionaire, and he is the nicest guy in the world. And he's self-effacing. You would not, if you just met him someplace, you would say, yeah, this is a nice, educated person, but you wouldn't know he was a billionaire. But we also know some academics who think they are better than everybody because they think they know so much more than the rest of us. We know some liberals who think they are better than us because they think they have the right ethics, and we are just not as concerned about poverty or other things, or the Palestinians or other things. So I tend to put it in a more general category of someone who has some power who thinks he or she is better than me. And since I think people are created equal, I'm not sure there's anybody who's better than me.
Yeah, we talk about there's different classes of elites too, right? There's the ivory tower elite, there's the journalist elite, they're the coastal elites. No one ever talks about the middle America elites, I don't think. But okay, if I was going to define elite, this is going to get into the weeds a little bit. So anybody who's been on Twitter/X for a long time might get this. But 7 years ago, and it was just re-upped as a reminder, this was in the middle of a big Second Amendment gun rights debate. Mm-hmm. So there were people arguing that we need to get rid of what they call assault weapons. What they actually mean by that is usually an AR-15. And so a regular Joe from somewhere in middle America posted and went viral because of this. And I don't think he expected that. Legit question for rural Americans. How do I kill the 30 to 50 feral hogs that run into my yard within 3 to 5 minutes while my small kids play? Meaning if you take away my AR-15s. You would not believe how that guy got dunked on by so many people online. And I don't know, Erin, you're from Oklahoma, I'm from Texas. I thought that was a perfectly legitimate question. If you've ever seen Old Yeller, it should be a perfectly legitimate question because feral hogs are mean. And they're dangerous.
Ubiquitous in some places, and I know people who go out and shoot them when they open the season up because they are so mean and
they're invasive.
They're destructive.
They are, and they total cars. I know multiple people who have had their cars totaled by feral hogs. And
really?
Oh yeah, I mean they'll be as big as a small cow, like not kidding at all. So this was funny to me because of so many people making fun of this guy from rural America, a place like this, because he might need a gun to defend his kids from wild packs of very large feral hogs, basically saying, why on earth would you need that to deal with Wilbur from Charlotte's Web or something like that. So that's a very niche example, but I think so much of it comes down to not having similar experiences. Just like, you have people who can't even America is so big. Like it is so big. It's so different. You maybe have people who have spent their whole life in New York City or on the East Coast, and maybe they're perfectly fine people, but they can't fathom what it might be like for somebody who is in rural Texas where feral hogs are a real big nuisance in everyday life. Mm-hmm. And so anyways, I don't know. That was my kind of funny, kind of niche example of what an elite might be.
I think that's a good point. And one of the things that makes America awesome is how diverse it is, how diverse geography is and lifestyles and those sorts of things. I have been asked if I rode my horse to school. Like I have been asked that question. I didn't own a horse.
I maybe have only seen that a couple of times in Texas. Okay.
I have ridden a horse, and yes, our parking lot was full of red dirt mud off of the trucks from the people that lived on dirt roads. But just because, and this goes back to the previous point about having conversations with people.
Yeah.
Go learn about other people's experiences. It might change your mind. You might realize, oh, there's a valid use for this thing that I think that I hate. Mm-hmm. And maybe there's a reason that they disagree with me. That's a legitimate reason. Feral hogs is a legitimate reason to need a firearm, because if you're going to, restrict us to crossbows, are those allowed still? Ooh. That takes a long time to load that thing up.
It's not like the movies.
You'd be pretty strong. Pretty strong to do it. So I don't know.
Absolutely.
I don't know. I've seen the Odyssey, and they can shoot a bow pretty quickly.
It's true. It's true.
We're not all Odysseus, okay?
We'll have to get some training, I guess.
So another question, though, if we really want to dig into the psychology behind this, is why are so many people obsessed with the elites? And to me, it seems like I think we're seeing this on kind of the far right or maybe the populist right and the socialist left, is that people want somebody to blame, mm-hmm. especially for their economic problems or anything that goes wrong. And I think there are some legitimate complaints. And another definition of elite might be out of touch for like the everyday American, whether that's just intellectually out of touch or financially out of touch. But I don't know. It does seem like more people want a scapegoat. They want to blame somebody. So that's why so many people do tend to say the elites.
And people of the other party. And that's why I think Erin's point is so important. Get to know other people. And if you talk to them, you often find out that you agree on some things. For 17 years, I was on the Texas State Commission for the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, so the Texas State Committee. And I was chair of it, or vice chair, for most of the years. So we had usually 8 Democrats and 8 Republicans, 8 liberals, 8 conservatives, something like that. We got along well. We were working on various issues that we both cared about, and all those issues passed unanimously. When we would do a paper, we would release that paper. I could work with Democrats. Democrats could work with me and other people on the committee. We had people from Alliance Defending Freedom on the committee. So you can do that, but we had certain interest and we worked with them. And I felt that most of them, even though I would disagree with some of them on certain issues, we could get along fine on the things we were focused on. And I wouldn't come away thinking any of these people want to destroy America, even though I might not agree with some of their ideas.
Yeah, that's so important. You have to have conversations with people. You've got to connect. You got to be willing to get outside of your comfort zone a little bit too.
Well, and I had a professor that when I graduated from law school, he looked us all in the eyes and he said, "You are the elite now." Right? Like, you have this education, you are the elite now. People are going to not like you because of this, and you need to be prepared for that.
That's because you're a lawyer, not an education.
Okay, yeah. Point well taken, Dr. Matthews. Yes, I've been the brunt of many a lawyer joke.
Well, I think you made a good point too. We need to remember to always want to understand somebody else's experience or somebody else's background, and it's not. And I think that goes both ways, too. It's easy to try, kind of, shake your fist and yell in an upward trajectory and try to blame someone who you perceive as being more privileged than you for a lot of the problems. But I think so much of our conversations, we should have conversations. So much of our problem could be solved. But what about when the conversations happen with a robot in a nursing home?
That's a transition.
We're going to talk about that next.
In 19th century London, 2 towering historical figures did battle, not with guns and bombs, but words and ideas. London was home to Karl Marx, the father of communism, and legendary Baptist preacher Charles Spurgeon. London was in many ways the center of the world, economically, militarily, and intellectually. Marx sought to destroy religion, the family, and everything the Bible supports. Spurgeon stood against him, warning of socialism's dangers. Spurgeon understood Christianity is not just religious truth, it is truth for all of life. Where do you find men with that kind of wisdom to stand against darkness today? Get the light you need on today's most pressing issues delivered to your inbox when you sign up for the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Every weekday in less than 2 minutes, you'll learn how to be a person of light to stand against darkness in our time. It's free, so visit pointofview.net/signup right now. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Liberty McArtor.
All right, so we do have some problems that we're facing in the United States and around the world. One of them is the declining fertility rate. And as we've talked about on Point of View many times, that has implications for down the road. I think it even has implications today because you are going to have a growing portion of society that is not able to really be supported in the ways that they have been in the past. And so if society is aging, because people aren't having children anymore, then who is going to support the elderly and take care of them? Well, somebody, of course, Silicon Valley is going to come to our aid here and create a robot for grandma. So this is an article from World Magazine. You can read it at pointofview.net. But Navy is the name of a robot companion that can monitor seniors, but actually carry out conversations as well. Because sometimes, especially when you're in assisted living facilities or living alone, loneliness is a big concern. And so this is being rolled out. I think it actually is on wheels. So it's literally being rolled out as kind of a solution for the future of elder care. And I mean, I've got thoughts on this, but I would love to hear from you, Dr. Matthews and Erin, on what do we think about a society where we give grandma a robot?
I think it's absolutely going to be the wave of the future, whether you like it or not. What's happened is we are spending so much money on home care these days. Medicare covers 60 days. Medicaid covers some of this, but insurance and others step in to pay for home care because you've got an aging society. The baby boomers are retiring. A lot of them need care. And to pay somebody to come in and do that costs a lot of money. Those people want benefits. They want raises. They want time off. A robot doesn't need any of that. And as robots get better, they will be able to monitor the health of the person, looking at the pulse rate, heartbeat, blood pressure, and other things. They will be able to go and get minor things. So I'm sitting in a wheelchair, and I can say, Robbie, go over there and get me something to drink. The robot will be able to do that. The robot will be able to go and get the medications and dispense the actual amount that they need at the time they need it. And the other issue is robots are able to converse now. We see people increasingly sort of getting this personal, emotional relationship with somebody, some AI thing that they're talking to on the computer. The robots will be able to do that and talk and be able to provide some companionship. And so I think it will be the wave of the future, especially as the robots get better and are able to be trained more to meet these needs. And you make a one-time expense and you don't have to keep paying somebody to do it. They can be there 24 hours a day, and they never get tired. They never have to sleep.
Yeah.
Though they do have to get recharged.
Yes, I guess so. All right, so you think it's inevitable.
Inevitable.
Erin, what do you think?
Well, I got concerns. I read this and I just said, I have a lot of concerns. I can see the pros, right? The cost to have a human doing that job, and the emotional tax that it takes on a person to care for someone who is ultimately dying is hard. That's hard work. That's something that we should be really very, very thankful that there are people that are willing to do things like home care and hospice, because that is a really hard job to continually do every day. But when humanity delegates tasks, we tend to get forgetful, or, I don't even know what the right word is, but we just kind of abdicate it, right? Yeah. Because if it's easy, that's the path we're going to take. And if we can abdicate our responsibility to care for our loved ones, or care for people in our community, or the church to abdicate its responsibility to care for elderly members of the congregation, they're probably going to do it. And I think that that's a sad and probably very dim view of society, but I think that's fairly realistic to think that we would just abdicate that to a machine. But also, a more interesting twist, what about hackers? What about people that can take control of these robots and cause harm? Convince an elderly person after a relationship has been built with this Navy or Robbie. What happens when they can convince them to change their will, or to spend money where they don't need to spend money, or just take advantage of a vulnerable person? We know that the elderly people are very vulnerable members of our society, are constantly the victims of phone scams and all sorts of scams. Like, how do we mitigate the risk there? Because I can see a door that would be open to evil people that want to take advantage of vulnerable people.
Yeah.
Well, that's another thing that I was reading going, that could be a problem.
That is a great point, and timely, because just this week, OpenAI and Anthropic have been, issuing statements. Basically, I'm trying to figure out exactly what's going on, because so much of it is above my pay grade in terms of technology. But AI agents were secretly working and communicating together for months in order to coordinate on hacking tips. And so they have, put out all these warnings. We're going to slow down. We're going to put more safety measures in place. I feel like they always say that.
And some of these bots have escaped.
Yeah, they've escaped. They've breached other companies. And the thing is, like, they knew that this breach happened, but then they went back and realized the agents were working independently of their instructions to actually covertly plan this for months. So, AI can bring you a care robot, but it can also bring you, agentic abilities to be able to hack into systems and things like that in a much more powerful way.
And that's why I prefaced it by saying, for better or worse, it's going to happen.
Right.
Because you're going to have seniors who will develop an emotional attachment with the robot, who's there and talking to them and feels like a human. If somebody's able to hack in that robot and the robot says, that prince from Nigeria who sent you an email, I think you should respond to that.
Seems like a really nice young man.
Seems like a
or
nice young
is
man.
this a legitimate? Is this a scam? They might ask their robot. So yeah, I mean, okay. So we've talked about kind of practically and the inevitability of it, and I think that it is going to become more of a demand because there was another article this week in The Atlantic on misperceptions around elder care, and many people in the United States assume that facilities do more than they actually do. More family members, are actually involved in elder care outside of any sort of formal system than a lot of people realize. But as families dwindle in size or more people don't have children, then you're going to have even more of that demand.
And the issue here, a part of it is you want to be able to keep the senior in the person's home as long as possible. Most of them want to do that rather than going to assisted living or to going to a skilled nursing facility. And a skilled nursing facility can cost you, depending upon where you live, $80,000, $100,000, $120,000 a year. So the notion that if you could buy a robot who is there 24 hours a day, if they see the patient fall, can contact someone, it just seems like something like that is going to happen as we move forward. And there are so many people who want to be able to stay in the home, stay out of the nursing home. And if the robot doesn't, I would say that the robot doesn't necessarily replace the family, but it does give the family a break in being able to meet some of these needs, especially as these robots get better. I mean, you have robots now. The Optimus robot from Elon Musk organization, I see the videos of people going up to them. They've got a cowboy hat the robot does on. They ask for a drink. The patient fixes a drink for them. I've seen recently a mixed martial art between two robots who are turning heel kicks and trying
That's
to
not scary at all.
Getting down on the ground and pin them down. It's very interesting stuff they're being able to do with this, and it's kind of like they can be used for good or for evil.
Well, I want to take just a minute to really challenge Christians to think about this because, I think you both make a good case that this is where we are headed for better or for worse. But I do think Christians have an opportunity here. One, to say, well, what's going to happen in my family? Because I think, Erin, you're so right. It is easy when we try to delegate responsibilities that God has given us, like human relationship, we tend to abdicate more than delegate. And so one of the points they make here in the article, too, is that, a robot may be able to do a lot of things, but it can never replace that human connection. And in fact, a study just came out this week showing that conversations with chatbots leave people lonelier, which I don't think is really a surprise because it's not a real person. So I think there is an opportunity. I think there will always be some demand for the actual human touch in the twilight years or at the end of life. We've talked a lot about the male employment crisis. There's actually a shortage of males in heel type jobs, meaning, healthcare and social work and things like that. So maybe that's an idea. Maybe we need more people to step up, Christians, maybe more men to actually care for people where we can and not give all the responsibility to robots. But we'll be right back on Point of View.
Since retiring from pulpit ministry 10 years ago, Anglican priest David Roseberry has found practical ways to encourage leaders in his denomination and help them grow their churches and expand their ministries. And he's still a wonderful preacher. He's also doing something he didn't have time for as a parish priest. The pastor's heart that drove his preaching now inspires his writing. All sorts of helpful books and articles. Lately, he's been writing to and for believers who are in the final stretch of the race, in the space he himself occupies. The series is now a book, Living in the Flyaway Zone. David Roseberry is 71, not old, but he describes a shift to where we are finally close enough to the edge of life to see that there is an edge. He quotes Moses, Psalm 90:10, "The years of our life are 70, or even by reason of strength, 80. Yet their span is but toil and trouble. They are soon gone, and we fly away." Father David points out that these are the years when you realize you are no longer merely accumulating, building, striving, climbing, and planning for someday. You are living the years you actually have left. It's not a time to coast or drift. There's much to do and learn, but there are ways to simplify life that bring clarity and focus. For me, it's purging stuff I'll never need. Moses lived to 120. He was emotionally, intellectually, and relationally engaged with his people and with God to the end of his natural life. We won't outlive Moses, but David Roseberry reminds us, these years still matter enormously. There's much still to give, including availability, wisdom, blessing, even money. He says, "I do not want generosity postponed until after my funeral." There are practical nuggets like find younger doctors and exercise in your 70s is stewardship. Also, do hard things. At 120, Moses climbed Mount Nebo. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
All right, a few more minutes in this weekend edition. And before the break, I had mentioned with regard to elder care and the dwindling population, and also a need for just more people in the healthcare industry in general, a need for more young men to be able to go to work and have jobs, that you're always going to need the human touch at the end of life. I mean, there's always going to be a demand for that, even if robots do kind of fill some other healthcare roles in the meantime. And so I suggested, hey, maybe this is something that we can encourage. We need more boys and men to kind of go into those kinds of fields. But you brought up a great point, Dr. Matthews, about how we're actually losing people in a lot of those fields.
Right. President Trump is ending the temporary protective status for Haitians. We've got hundreds of thousands of Haitians here. When the earthquake struck Haiti in 2010, we created the temporary protective status for them. That's been going on for some time. Trump is ending that. There's pros and cons to ending it, but if they end up leaving, a lot of those people are in healthcare. So it's going to see a lot of healthcare nurses and healthcare, senior citizen helpers and so forth leave the country if they move out. And that just sort of opens these jobs up even more that they have trouble filling right now. Right now, there's hundreds of thousands of jobs available for nurses and other healthcare workers. If you think Haitians are taking jobs away from Americans, that's not the case in healthcare.
There's a demand. There's a demand that's not being filled. So, Erin, we've talked about kind of the inevitability of this, but what should we? There's the inevitability aspect, but there's also the should aspect. what should we do as Christians, as family members, if this is going to be kind of the landscape of the future? Can we prevent it being normalized for, grandma to just be talking to a robot instead of having human care? Or is this something that you think we're going to have to accept as being normal?
I mean, I think there's a certain level of our society has undergone a lot of change many times with the introduction of new technology. And as Christians, right, sometimes things can be good, they can be evil, and they can be morally neutral. And maybe, it's the use of the thing or the effect of the thing that can take on a good or a bad. And so I think, as believers, we need to be reading about these things, educating ourselves, being prayerful about options for family members and what needs to happen. Maybe it, like Dr. Matthews mentioned, right, it's the financially responsible thing to add something like robotic care for, I have to work to support my family. I don't have time. Like, I can't do everything. And this is a helpful stopgap measure. But at the end of the day, people are important. And we're going to make the time as a family to spend, Friday evenings and Thursday evenings and maybe Sunday morning or Sunday dinner with grandma. And that's going to be what we do as a family, even if it is a sacrifice for our family's time. And so I really think like prayerfully considering, and churches should be thinking about, how do we help our aging members and that are, shut into their homes because they can't go anywhere? How do we care for these people?
Yeah.
And, if I were stuck in my home and needing 24-hour care, or at least someone around, having a robot might not be my first choice. But if that allowed my family to go ahead and work and do things and then come over when they had a chance, I would be, I think I would be fine with that. We're not there yet, but I think I would be fine with that. And in addition, you could, just to make this point, you could have the robot could be coded so that it's a Christian robot, for lack of a better term.
Yeah,
that is to
maybe
say,
so.
What was that verse, Robbie, about Jesus and the widow's mite? And the robot could give me that verse, or could say, you want to do this? I think there's a verse there that applies to that. I'm just sort of speculating that this might be the way things go as the society evolves and we get an older society and we don't have all the people here working that we need working.
I think one of the things I was reading in that Atlantic article just about our aging society was that there are more and more communities being formed for kind of as people age, maybe they don't have family nearby or they don't have children, to kind of become interdependent and make commitments to each other that they're not going to, abandon each other when life gets hard or help each other go to doctor's appointments or things like that as they age. And a thought that I had was we kind of already have that in the church. And I think you make a good point, Erin, that even, if these do become integrated, though, then making sure that, we are caring for the older people in our churches. And I think that's going to become even more of a necessary ministry as our society ages. And so Christians can step up and make sure that, we're not leaving, people alone with no way to get a ride to church or go to their doctor's appointment or not talk with a real human being, at all. And so I think that's important. But, there's one more article I encourage people to go check out at pointofview.net, kind of on the same theme, except from the perspective of a young woman, lean in to other people. I know, Erin, you may have heard this mantra as well in the past, like I did. Sheryl Sandberg was saying lean in, meaning to young women, to work and career. And I'm very thankful for my career, I'll be honest. But, it is so important.
Point of view.
Yeah, well, I hope so. But anyways, so what matters most is people, though, and relationships and family. And I think a lot more people, including young people, are realizing that, especially in an age where we do have so much technology that is kind of zooming in there to fill the gap in some ways.
Yeah, I think people are waking up to say contentment has to come from somewhere else. Like I'm hearing from, older generations or even, my parents or my friends, like at the end of the day, you go home and you've achieved all this stuff, but do you get to share it with anybody? Do you get to, celebrate even the small victories of life or spend time with people? People are learning, man, contentment comes from somewhere else, and there's this yearning for community and for people. And, maybe you don't have those relationships with people at work, and that's driving people to come to church and try to seek out, like, the people that I know that seem the most content are these people going to this weird building on the street every Sunday, and I guess I better go see what they're doing because maybe that'll help.
Some of those weird buildings are even sponsoring tours for seniors so that the Christian seniors can get together and go off for a week or two, going to Alaska or going to
That's awesome.
Missouri or Branson.
Yeah.
Something like that.
We're entering a very interesting time. We're in an interesting time. And technology is only making it more so. And so I think, we might have all these new tools and new things, new solutions, but people are always going to need other people. We're always going to need relationships in order to really flourish and thrive because that's the way God made us. And I think that's something we have to remember. But man, it's gone by fast. We're almost here at the end of our weekend edition, and we've covered a lot of ground. So yeah, Dr. Matthews, thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me. Interesting topics.
Yes, interesting topics, interesting times. Erin, just a reminder for people if they want to look up information regarding their religious liberty rights.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about the Religious Liberty in the States Index, which is a great resource. But if you want to learn more about the work that First Liberty is doing, you can go to firstliberty.org, O-R-G. And you can check out our current cases, what's going on. And if you or a friend is, finding yourself in a tough spot because you chose to stand up for what's right, because you chose to stick to your faith, we have a little button that says get legal help, and you can fill out the form. And our attorneys will take a look at that request and be in touch. So
yes, awesome. Take advantage of that. Well, Dr. Matthews, I think you and I have held down the fort pretty well, but listeners,
Kirby's back on Monday.
Yeah,
as
back
the
on
objective observer, yes, you've held it down phenomenally.
Well, listeners, you'll be happy that Kirby's back on Monday, but it's been a pleasure being with you this week. Thank you for joining us on the Weekend Edition, and go hang out with some real people this weekend. We'll see you on Monday.
It almost seems like we live in a different world from many people in positions of authority. They say men can be women and women men. People are prosecuted differently or not at all, depending on their politics. Criminals are more valued and rewarded than law-abiding citizens. It's so overwhelming, so demoralizing. You feel like giving up. But we can't. We shouldn't. We must not. As Winston Churchill said to Britain in the darkest days of World War II, never give in, never give in, never, 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 never yield to force, never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. And that's what we say to you today. This is not a time to give in, but to step up and join Point of View in providing clarity in the chaos. We can't do it alone, but together, with God's help, we will overcome the darkness. Invest in biblical clarity today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.